Lions Nation. Right away, everything about this moment with the Detroit Lions feels like the season has been pushed to the edge, and every fan watching already knows why. Hours before a massive showdown against the Dallas Cowboys, the team scrambled to reshuffle pieces, patch holes, and essentially rebuild an offense and defense battered by one of the longest injury reports we've seen all year. And as we dive into this, it's impossible not to feel the tension of a team that knows this isn't just another game. It's the kind where desperation becomes fuel, and where unexpected contributors might suddenly have to become defining players. The first ripple came with the signing of wide receiver Andrew Armstrong to the practice squad, a move that didn't draw much national attention but one that matters for Lions fans who understand the domino effect this roster is facing. Armstrong, a long, athletic receiver out of Arkansas who originally landed with the Dolphins as an undrafted free agent, joins Detroit at a moment where depth isn't just useful, it's survival. Nobody expects him to walk into Dallas and take over, but his arrival highlights the reality of what's going on behind the scenes. Khalif Raymond is out. Amon-Ra St. Brown is questionable, and the receiver room that once felt like a strength is suddenly a sketchbook of possibilities, unknowns, and opportunities. That leaves Jameson Williams as the primary weapon, the only full-time wideout still standing, and the expectation is clear, heavy usage. But the real intrigue rests with the names most fans didn't expect to be central figures in a game this important. Isaac TeSlaa, the rookie with size, physicality, and flashes of contested catch potential, is expected to play one of his biggest roles of the year. This is a player the organization showed real faith in, trading away Tim Patrick earlier in the season because they believed TeSlaa could be that big-bodied presence. Up to now, he hasn't been unleashed, but injuries have a way of forcing plans forward, and this might be the moment he gets 5, 6, maybe more targets, something he hasn't seen yet in a single game. Then you have Dominic Lovett, the draft pick out of Georgia with twitch, separation ability, and the kind of short area quickness that can punish softer coverages. Pair that with Tom Kennedy, yes, the same Tom Kennedy most fans adore for his reliability, and suddenly the depth chart becomes a patchwork of trusted grit and untested upside. Throw in Jackson Meeks, who has been cross-training at tight end, and it's clear Detroit is preparing to mix in unusual formations, flex alignments, and anything needed to survive the night. But while the receiver room is undergoing an emergency reconfiguration, the offensive line's condition is even more concerning. Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell remain questionable, though in truth both have been playing through questionable tags for weeks. The real crisis sits inside. Coyote Iwasaka, who had already stepped into a starting role after multiple injuries at guard, suddenly popped up with a midweek downgrade, going from practicing Tuesday to not practicing Wednesday. That's the kind of shift that terrifies coaches. Graham Glasgow's knee injury kept him out last week, leaving the team relying on Tristan Colon, and if either of them can't go, the Lions could be down to their fourth-string guard again. And this isn't the week to lose bodies inside. The Cowboys now feature Quinnen Williams, transforming their defensive front from solid to dangerous. Protection for Jared Goff, who already needs clean pockets to operate at his best, becomes the number one storyline. It's wild to say, but losing top corners hurts less in this matchup than losing interior linemen, and the Lions may be dealing with both, because defensively, the picture gets even darker. Terrion Arnold is out for the year. Kirby Joseph is out. Brian Branch remains questionable with both a toe and ankle issue. At this point, it's not even clear who will be lining up in the secondary around Cam Sutton. And this is where the anxiety of Lions fans echoes the tone inside the building. The injuries don't just pile up, they stack on the same position groups over and over again. The defensive interior, the secondary, the offensive interior. Every place where depth was already thin is now pushed to the brink. And yet, despite all of that, there's an odd undercurrent of confidence, not because the Lions are healthy or rolling, but because this franchise under Dan Campbell has repeatedly shown that desperation doesn't break them, it sharpens them. We've seen injured-up rosters beat good teams before. We've seen Goff elevate when the margin for error shrinks. We've seen role players, the Tom Kennedys of the world, turn into unexpected heroes. The question tonight isn't whether the Lions can play with heart, it's whether heart will be enough when the depth chart looks like a game of Jenga in the final rounds. So with all that being said, here's where I want to hear from you before we continue into the second part. With the offense taped together, the defense missing half its starters, and the Cowboys fully aware of Detroit's vulnerabilities, which player do you believe needs to step up the most for the Lions to survive this matchup? And picking up right from there, the answer to who needs to step up becomes clearer the deeper we go into how the Lions plan to survive this game. Because when an entire roster is stretched thin, it's never just one player who carries the load. It becomes a chain reaction. One big catch from Isaac TeSlaa can change a drive. One laser from Jared Goff on 3rd and long keeps the defense off the field a little longer. One disciplined rep from a backup guard can be the difference between a clean pocket and a game-changing turnover. And that's where Detroit needs to live. In the small moments, the hidden snaps, the guys who weren't meant to be in these roles but now have no choice. The wide receiver group is where this transformation becomes the most obvious. Jameson Williams can't simply be a deep threat tonight. He has to be the guy. But the reality is Dallas knows that too. They'll roll coverage, they'll bracket him, and they'll make someone else beat them. That's why the pressure shifts straight onto Dominic Lovett and Tom Kennedy, two players who have completely different profiles but might be equally important. Lovett brings burst, separation, and a level of quickness that can shake zones and punish defenders who play too soft. Kennedy brings reliability, timing, and that uncanny sense for space that has made him a quiet favorite among teammates and fans. If either of those two can consistently give Goff 5 or 6 clean completions, Detroit suddenly has structure again. And then there's Tesla, a player who feels like he's standing at the edge of his moment. Detroit didn't stash him for nothing. They didn't trade away Tim Patrick for nothing. They believed his combination of size, strength, and contested catchability would eventually matter. And games like this are where players like that reveal themselves. It doesn't have to be 8 catches or 100 yards. It can be 2 or 3 plays that swing momentum, extend drives, or take advantage of a defense hyper-focused on JMO. Sometimes the pressure of being the only true outside threat on the field either creates a problem or an opportunity. Tonight, it must be the latter. But even if the offense hits its marks, the defense is where this game becomes a tightrope. With Terry and Arnold out for the season, Kirby Joseph unavailable, and Brian Branch questionable, the entire structure of the secondary is being rebuilt on the fly. The Lions can't run the same man-heavy concepts that repeatedly burned them in recent weeks. They simply don't have the bodies. And what's at stake isn't just scheme, it's keeping these defenders healthy. Press man requires physical collisions, constant hand fighting, and reactive sprinting across the field. Zone gives players a chance to breathe, stay square, avoid unnecessary contact, and minimize miscommunication. That's why tonight feels like a test of humility for the defensive staff. Early in the season, Shep proved he was willing to adjust, to deviate from the plan when necessary. But lately, those adjustments have faded. Tonight may force them back into that mindset. Because if Detroit trots out one more week of predictable man coverage beaters where receivers are running free on crossers while undersized corners chase hopelessly behind, this game will be over long before the final whistle. The blueprint has to change. Sit back, force long drives, make Dallas execute in the red zone, make them beat zone windows instead of beating fatigued corners on horizontal routes. And most importantly, protect the few healthy defensive backs still able to play. Detroit doesn't need to become a shutdown unit tonight. They just need to be unpredictable, disciplined, and opportunistic. Every season under Dan Campbell has included at least one moment where the team feels broken, outmatched, undermanned, and then somehow finds a way to rise. Think back to the Monday night demolition of the Buccaneers when nobody gave Detroit a shot because of injuries. That team showed up angry, focused, and completely fearless. And tonight might require the same thing. Not because the Lions are the better team on paper, but because they're the more desperate one, and teams like that sometimes play with a different kind of clarity. So as we close this out and throw it to you, the fans who live every snap of this team right alongside them, I want your thoughts. What do you think happens if Detroit actually pulls this off? Does it become the spark that realigns the season, or is this simply the last stand of a roster fighting through too many wounds? And before you click away, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the other videos on the screen. And the truth is, if the Lions do manage to pull this off, it won't be because the matchup favored them or because the roster suddenly got healthy. It will be because a team that's been pushed into a corner refused to back down. It will be because backups stepped into roles they weren't supposed to play and delivered anyway. It will be because players like Isaac Tesla, Dominic Lovett, Tom Kennedy, and Jackson Meeks didn't just fill space, they created momentum. And because Jared Goff, behind a patchwork offensive line, found ways to stay upright long enough to keep this offense functioning. A win in a situation like this would echo through the entire building. It would shift the tone of the season instantly. It would signal to every team ahead on the schedule that Detroit doesn't fold when things get ugly, they harden. And for the coaching staff, it would mark a turning point, a moment where adjustments weren't optional but essential, and where the ability to adapt under pressure became the difference between sinking and surviving. But if the Lions come up short, it won't be for lack of fight. It will simply be because the injuries finally piled too high. And that's why this game feels like more than a scoreboard result. It feels like a statement of who this team is right now. A crossroads game. A character game. The kind of game that doesn't just define a week but defines how you respond for the rest of the year. So now I want to hear from you, truly. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Who's the one player you believe can tilt this game? Who has to rise for Detroit to have a shot? And how do you see this matchup unfolding given everything the Lions are battling through? And as we look ahead, what makes this moment so gripping is that it feels like the entire season is holding its breath. Every snap, every adjustment, every unexpected contributor matters more than it should. That's what happens when you're playing without your stars, leaning on rookies, backups, and practice squad promotions to carry the weight of a playoff race. It's uncomfortable, it's chaotic, and honestly, it's the exact kind of environment where past Lions teams would have folded. But this one doesn't seem wired that way. What you're watching now is a team trying to rediscover its identity in real time. Early in the season, the Lions won by dictating everything: tempo, physicality, rhythm. They didn't ask their defense to survive shootouts because they didn't need to. They didn't ask their receivers to be heroes because the depth was intact. They didn't ask the offensive line to play at 60% because the starters were healthy. But now it's the opposite. They have to adapt. They have to evolve. And sometimes, that's when the most surprising growth happens. If Detroit is going to steady itself, it starts with the little things. Converting a 3rd and 4 that normally goes to Amon Ra but now goes to Dominic Lovett. Hitting a back shoulder throw to Isaac Teslau when the offense stalls. Using Tom Kennedy on timing routes that keep drives alive. Finding ways to let Jameson Williams' speed matter even when he's bracketed. And yes, trusting Jahmyr Gibbs to be the heartbeat of the offense when the passing attack is stretched thin. On defense, even 1 or 2 stops could flip the momentum of an entire quarter. Playing with depth issues in the secondary is terrifying, but the Lions don't need to be perfect. They just need to be unpredictable. A disguised coverage here, a delayed pressure there, forcing the Cowboys into long fields instead of quick strikes. It's about not giving away free yards, not letting crossers turn into explosives, not letting the game slip away in the first half like we've seen before. Sometimes football becomes less about the stars you have and more about the composure you hold. And if the Lions can just keep that emotional balance, that blend of urgency without panic, then they can drag this thing into the 4th quarter. And if they're still in it with 5 minutes left, that's when anything becomes possible. That's when all those backup receivers suddenly matter. When all those patchwork linemen suddenly become the difference. When all the frustration and all the injuries take a back seat to one final drive, one final stand. Because that's been the identity of this era, resilience in the moments where it would have been easiest to crumble. And whether the scoreboard ends in heartbreak or triumph, tonight will tell us something real about who this team is at its core. So let me throw it back to you once more as we wrap this up. If this game comes down to one final possession, offense or defense, who do you trust most on this roster to make that defining play? Drop your answer in the comments. And when you really sit with that question, who you trust in that final possession, it forces you to look at this roster in a different light. Not through the lens of who's missing, but through the lens of who's still standing. Because sometimes the players who rise in those moments aren't the ones anyone predicted at the start of the season. Maybe it's Jared Goff, the guy who has taken every shot this team's chaotic year has thrown at him and still finds a way to stay calm when everything around him is frantic. Maybe it's Jahmyr Gibbs, whose ability to turn a 2-yard loss into a 6-yard gain is exactly the kind of play that decides seasons. Maybe it's Brian Branch, if he's able to suit up, showing once again that his instincts are the kind you can build a defense around. Or maybe it's someone nobody expected, a Tom Kennedy sideline catch, a Teslau contested grab, a Dominic Lovett burst across the middle that puts Detroit in field goal range. This team has been forced into a situation where everyone has to believe they're that guy, even if they weren't supposed to be. And the beauty of this moment, stressful as it is that we've seen Detroit players answer that call before. The Buccaneers game, the Packers games last year, the matchups where no one outside Detroit gave them a chance, but inside the locker room, there was never a second of doubt. That's why this night matters. Not because a single win rewrites the season, but because responding when everything is stacked against you is exactly what defines the teams that make it to January and survive once they get there. The Lions aren't playing for style points anymore. They're playing for grit, for identity, for the belief that even when half your roster is limping, you can still punch back harder than anyone expects. And that's what makes this upcoming moment so compelling for every fan watching. That quiet hope that this is the night when someone unexpected becomes the story. The night where a roster held together with tape and heart refuses to let go of the season. The night where the Lions look at the adversity around them and say, not today. Now tell me this, if the Lions do get that defining moment, whether it's a stop, a drive, a kick, or a miracle? Who do you think delivers it? I want to hear every prediction, every gut feeling, and every bold call in the comments. And before you jump to the next thing, make sure you're subscribed. Hit that like button so this content reaches more Lions fans, and check out the videos on your screen for more deep dive coverage and analysis. And maybe that's the part that makes this matchup so gripping, the understanding that the Lions aren't just fighting an opponent, they're fighting circumstance. They're fighting attrition. They're fighting the narrative that injuries are an excuse instead of a challenge. And every time this coaching staff has been cornered, every time this locker room has been doubted, they've leaned into that moment instead of backing away from it. Because this game, with all its flaws and all its chaos, is still a chance to remind the league that Detroit doesn't operate like it used to. They don't crumble when the depth chart collapses. They don't panic when uncertainty creeps in. They don't shift blame when players drop, one after another. They simply keep swinging until the final whistle. And that identity, forged over the last few years, is the one thing the injuries can't touch. It's why the idea of an unlikely hero doesn't feel far-fetched. Think about how many times in the Campbell era it wasn't the big names but the overlooked ones who changed everything. Catches from guys who were cut 3 times. Tackles from players who weren't on the roster a month earlier. Blocks from linemen who weren't supposed to play until next season. Detroit's entire rise has been built on the belief that every guy on the roster matters, and tonight is the ultimate stress test of that philosophy. So maybe the final defining moment doesn't come from a star at all. Maybe it's a clean pull block from a backup guard on the final drive. Maybe it's Taslau winning a back shoulder ball on 3rd and 8. Maybe it's Dominic Lovett shaking free in space. Maybe it's a perfectly timed pressure from a defender who wasn't in the original game plan. When you're this banged up, you don't win by overpowering teams, you win by outlasting them, outthinking them, and refusing to break. And if the Lions manage to do that, even for one night, it changes the tone of the entire season. It resets the confidence. It rebuilds momentum. It buys time for players to heal. It reinforces everything this team claims to be. A win like this doesn't just lift the record, it lifts the belief inside the building, the belief in the fan base, and the belief in the identity that's been built piece by piece. So let me throw it back to you one last time in this segment. When you imagine this game tightening in the 4th quarter, clock bleeding, tension rising, one possession to define the night, what do you see? Who's on the field? What's the play? Who delivers the moment? Paint the picture in the comments, because every fan sees a different version of that final drive, and I want to hear yours. And the more you imagine that final drive, the more you realize how thin the margin really is for a team in Detroit's position. It's not about drawing up the perfect play or waiting for some miracle breakdown in the Cowboys' defense. It's about execution when your body hurts, when your lineup is patched together, when the pressure is suffocating, and when the next mistake might decide the entire game. That's where teams reveal who they are, not in the scripted opening drives, but in the chaos when nothing is guaranteed. That's why so much of this night hinges on composure. Jared Goff doesn't have his full arsenal, but he has enough if the timing is sharp. Gibbs doesn't have a fully healthy line in front of him, but he can still turn a broken play into 6 yards if he gets just a sliver of space. Jameson Williams might be bracketed all game